Now is Colin Willoughby. So he recently retired from private practice, but he was the Wake County District Attorney in Raleigh, North Carolina for 27 years. And I think that's the longest tenure for a district attorney in Wake County, if I'm not mistaken. Does that sound right?
I think so.
Welcome to the program. So I was assigned to cover the Wake County justice system for 20 years of your tenure. And, I think the thing that really impressed me about working with you was your ability to talk to the media at any time. You were very open. And I think that just doesn't exist so much anymore. I mean, at the time, we developed a relationship, I think a professional relationship that made that possible.
It did. It did. It was a different time. And I felt like the public needed to know what was going on in the courthouse, and we wanted to tell folks as much as we could without jeopardizing investigations.
Yeah, and I think you really leaned into that. I know you covered so many interesting cases. Excuse me, I covered interesting cases that you were prosecuting,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
I think, there were a few that stand out. And one of those cases is the 2000 poisoning death of Eric Miller by his wife, Ann Miller. This was a case that took years to solve. And it was pretty unusual because it was a female suspect at the time she was eventually pled guilty. It's crazy to think, right, that this was 25 years ago.
It is.
Feels like it
It's a
was
long
yesterday.
time, and it doesn't seem like that, but time's gone by.
Do you remember how you were first briefed on this case, how you heard about it?
Yes, I remember at first. It, it was several days into the case. My memory is that um, it involved Eric going to, and do you want me to get into facts about the Eric going to the bowling alley and
Yeah,
having beer?
whatever
He
comes
went,
to mind.
Eric went to a bowling outing with some friends. I think they were Glaxo work friends of his wife Ann. He was not supposed. He was not part of the regular group. She was. She wasn't there, but he filled in for her. And during the course of the evening, commented about how his beer tasted funny or different. And later that evening, he got sick, got nauseous, went home, was not doing well. Um, and so the next morning, he was still sick. And they went to the hospital, Rex, I believe, and he got treated there and stayed briefly. I can't remember, a day or so, then went home. And um, the next day, he got deathly ill again and went back to Rex, and they immediately sent him over to Chapel Hill and for treatment. And the doctors discovered what they thought might be arsenic, and that triggered law enforcement's involvement. And so at that point, the court system and the investigators were involved.
And when you hear arsenic poisoning, which is not something that we normally would look for, I would think, in most investigations, you immediately probably go to, well, could it have been something in the lab where he worked because he was a researcher? Could it have been something on the lawn? I mean, because historically, arsenic was involved in some, landscaping products, for example.
Sure.
So you don't immediately say, "Oh, wow, this is a murder," right? I mean, how do you approach that?
I think that was everyone's immediate response was, this is probably some environmental exposure, because he worked in a research lab, I think doing pediatric research in Chapel Hill, and we thought perhaps he'd been exposed to something in the lab, and that this was all accidental. And neither he nor his family suspected Anne of being involved.
It's interesting because I wrote a book on this case, and I know that the lead investigator, Chris Morgan, he suspected her pretty quickly. And he based that on, experience as an
Yeah.
investigator and observing her and her actions shortly after the death. So, how quickly did you come around to that? I mean, and what did it take for you to say, okay, maybe we need to look a little bit closer at this?
Well, I think Chris and the folks at Major Crimes started digging in very quickly, and some of the circumstances seemed unusual. Like his first exposure, then getting a little better, going home. He ate some additional food at home, and then got violently ill again. And at that point, the suspicions were this is not just an exposure of environmental exposure at the lab, but it was um, probably coming
Continuous.
from something intentional.
And I learned probably more about arsenic than I ever wanted to learn in my life. I'm sure you did too.
Yeah.
And what I learned was that you don't have to. um it's not in degrees. In other words, you don't have to continually poison someone. You can just poison them one time, and there is one actual dose that kills you. Although the previous poisonings can break your organs down for sure, but it really is just it's just you give the person enough arsenic to kill them, and they die. So I guess this was something where you were constantly having to consult with experts, right, to understand what was happening.
We were, and the some scientists were very helpful with us to try to um, educate us about the number of doses, the amount that would be toxic, over what period of time or what amounts, and so a number of those things. And my recollection was the very first test results we got back looked not suspicious because of a mistake where it had been uh, whether it was sample was from blood or urine, the numbers differ significantly from one to the other, and it was mistaken as to which one this was. And so I think that didn't trigger quite the same response at first until the scientists got involved and really started helping us.
Yeah, and my recollection is that the actual length of the poisoning was over about a 6 month period until
Right.
obviously he was given the dose that killed him. Um, when you started talking to Anne or trying to talk to Anne, did you get resistance?
Yes. Well, we had a team of lawyers. Becky Holt and Doug Fawcett and I were all working on the case, and she had a team. She had Joe Cheshire and Wade Smith, and they, they're all good lawyers. Joe and Wade are two of the best lawyers in the country, and they were very good at protecting their client and keeping us from getting access to information that we wanted. And they did a great job. Very professional, but they were very good at their job.
Absolutely. And, you know, that's obviously what they're paid to do is defense attorneys.
It
I
is.
always tell people that if
That's
you
right.
don't like a defense attorney, wait till you need one because,
Yeah,
right? Defense attorneys that their job is to protect their client under the law
it
and to
is.
do it ethically. Um, how did how did Eric's family react? At what point were they going, okay, we're concerned now? And I know that that's a big part of how you build a case, right? You talk to the people around the victim and try to find out, for example, in this case, what's the state of the marriage?
Yeah, and I don't think they suspected anything about Anne. I think the family was very cordial with her, and no one thought that there was something in the marriage like this that would have resulted in her poisoning him. So they were at first skeptical, like us, thinking that maybe it was an environmental exposure. But after the information kept coming in, and particularly when the Chris Morgan and the detectives went to talk with Daryl Willard and um, encountered him, and they learned a little bit more about his and Ann's relationship, then they gradually came over and saw this is not an accidental exposure. This is something deliberate.
Right, and I know that she had multiple affairs, or there was information that evidence that she'd had multiple affairs, and I think you and I've even talked about this before. Plenty of people have affairs and don't kill their spouse, right? So that in itself is not a is not a evidence of somebody being a murderer,
Sure.
but you did learn more about Daryl Willard, and Daryl Willard was someone that she not only had an affair with, but she had shared some information with, and then Daryl Willard took his life. So this made it difficult for you to get that information. Um, I'm jumping ahead a little, but talk a
Sure.
little bit about how you were able to get the information he shared with his attorney, because at the time in North Carolina, attorney client privilege protected that information, even though Daryl Willard had taken his own life.
It was the attorney-client privilege is very sacred, like your priest-penitent privilege, and even it extends even beyond death. And so we learned that um, when they tried to interview Daryl, that he told the police he wanted to talk to a lawyer, and he went and talked to Rick Gammon, another great lawyer involved in this. That was did a really good job of protecting his client. But he talked with Daryl and gave Daryl information about his assessment of Daryl's culpability, because I think Daryl acknowledged probably that he put arsenic in the beer the first night and was complicit with Ann in this efforts to poison him. And so Daryl went home after his conversation with Rick and talked with his wife and told her about the assessment and that he might be culpable for the homicide. And uh, when we learned after his suicide, we learned from his wife that he had made these admissions to her. And so we knew that the information between he and Rick was critical and would be very important to the case.
And what was interesting about that was her saying that wasn't enough, right? You,
No, it was that put it further away, and we just and she was also a spouse, which created another level of privilege, and so it that was not a viable way to for us to go about it. So that's when we began to focus on his conversations with Rick and trying to develop a way to get that information and be able to use it.
so, and we'll get to the conclusion of that in a little while, but this was a long investigation, right? I mean, this was years.
It went on for several years because we initiated a civil action in order to try to get the information from Rick, and that matter, after going through hearing stage, was appealed to the Supreme Court and then came back. And so it took several years for us to go through this process and be able to get the information in a usable form.
And in the meantime, she goes to Wilmington, where her family is. She had a daughter. And so she and her daughter go to Wilmington. She remarries. She continues her scientific career working for a company in Wilmington. Was it frustrating for you and your team to know that she's just out there living her best life?
Well, it was, I think it probably was um, incentivizing us to try to do something. We felt like we didn't have enough to go forward. We couldn't charge. We were convinced that she was culpable in this. And so it just made everyone work that much harder to try to find a creative way to get where we needed to go.
And I think what a lot of people don't realize in these cases, especially in a county like Wake County, which is a big county in North Carolina, but in terms of the legal community, it's pretty small. You and all of the defense attorneys, the prosecutors and defense attorneys, you're collegial. I mean,
We are.
you are professional friends. Some of you are personal friends,
We
but the
are.
reality is you're all trying to do a job. So as
We
much
are.
as Rick may have wanted to give you the information, he couldn't do it until a court ordered it.
That's exactly right. I mean, he did his job. That was the only thing professionally that he could do. Um, and so it was, and we all are. I mean, we're all still friends today. I mean, I see Joe and Wade, and we get lunch together and coffee, and I with Rick often, and David Long, and all the Joe Zestarski, all the folks that were involved. We were friends. We remain friends, and we're still friends. But we all realized we had jobs to do,
Jobs to
and we
do, and
all
your adversaries in the courtroom, because
yes,
you're representing different points of view. I
yeah,
think also what people don't realize when people say, well, why aren't you solving this case, because we used to do many follow-ups on,
yeah,
well, why isn't this case been solved? you're dealing with hundreds of cases. I mean, this is just one of a high profile case, but life goes on in the district attorney's office even
Right.
when you have an unsolved murder.
Yeah.
You're dealing with everyday cases, and that's kind of the bread and butter of what you guys do, and you can't be just all focused on one murder case.
Yeah. At the time, we probably were getting 150,000 misdemeanors a year and probably 12 or 14,000 felonies a year for people who were actually being arrested, not just the crimes that were unsolved. And so it was, it was a work in progress. I mean, you're trying to keep up with what's coming in the front door and work on this, knowing that, we've got to do something because, a man's dead and it's not been resolved. And we felt like we had to do that.
Right, right. Now you finally get the ruling from the Supreme Court. It's very narrow.
It is.
And I'm going to say what I think it is, and then you tell me if I'm right or wrong. Basically, it said that if an attorney knows something about a case that could solve the case but doesn't implicate his or her client, he can reveal that. So it's kind of a third party information highway, if you will.
It was very narrow, well crafted. I think might have been Chief Justice Lake might have been the one that wrote the opinion, but it was very narrowly done. I think the court wisely realized that this was information that was necessary to solve an important, serious case, and they looked for a way to try to do that in a way that it wouldn't do damage to the attorney-client privilege, because I think they realized how valuable that was to our system, and that we couldn't just throw it out. And I think they were very careful in the way they went about that. And we haven't had a floodgate of problems since then. It applied to that one situation, and then I don't know that it's applied to much of anything since then.
And so Rick gave his, I guess, testimony in camera, meaning with just the judge, and that information was then put into a document, and one small piece, paragraph 9, was able to be used by you and your team. Can you explain what paragraph 9 was?
Um, Paragraph 9, the best of my recollection, was that it talked about um, Daryl's interaction with Ann, uh, up to and including a face-to-face visit in the hospital parking lot while Eric was a patient in the hospital, and she acknowledged what had been going on, and that she had taken some syringe or something and injected an additional dose of the toxin in his IV line while he was in the hospital, and she was there to care for him, that resulted in his death.
Yeah, and so that obviously was the thing, right? That
Yeah,
broke the case
right.
wide open.
It was.
Um, Eventually, it was decided instead of a trial that she would take a plea. Those are always difficult, I know, because you've worked on a case for so long, but you kind of weigh it and say, well, what's the best possible outcome for the public, right?
Well, we look at it's sort of a three-legged stool. We need to look at the public, we need to look at the individual victim, and we need to look at our system of justice and try to decide what meets the best for all of those. And in this case, after much consultation with the family, um, we decided that we would accept a plea of guilty that resulted in her being incarcerated for about 25 years. Um, and that would be the finality of the case, which was important. I think we all realize that because of the nature of the evidence and the attorney-client privilege, that if we went to trial, and we felt like we had good evidence, the trial, that we could be successful and get a conviction, but we thought the appeal process would go on for years, and you don't know what will happen. It could result in 3 or 4 or 5 years from now, this case getting overturned and coming back and us having to either retry it without that information, or be in a position where we couldn't retry it. And so with all of those unknowns involved, we all reached a compromise position that the family felt like um, protected them under the circumstances.
And also protected, I guess, the child of Eric and Ann, that she would grow up
that was a
outside
very important part.
on her own. Yeah.
They wanted to be able to um, provide her upbringing and nourishment and care, and they were able to do that with this plea. They took over, and the child will be an adult, and she is now, I guess, an adult by the time that this Anne was released from prison, and she could make her own decisions at that time. But it gave them an opportunity to protect their grandchild and niece and do what they thought was right.
And I remember Chris Morgan, the lead investigator, he felt that Anne was a pretty persuasive person, pretty charming, and that had she gone to trial and had she been put on the stand, I mean, that's a wild card for the state, right? You don't know
It
how
is.
that's going to play out in front of a jury.
It absolutely is. And although there's no guarantees, we thought we had a good case. We had a good tribal case. We were prepared to try it if need be, but we also recognize that there are frailties with it. And when you go in a trial, anything can happen. And we wanted to take that risk and uncertainty out for the family as well as the community.
What do you recollect from that day of the plea? Because I was there and I remember, I mean, I remember a couple things. I remember the emotion of Eric's family, right? I
Yeah.
mean, they did a victim impact statement. I think one of his sisters did a very strong victim impact statement, very, emotional. I think Anne was pretty stoic, and I think mostly her attorneys spoke for her. I don't recall her saying much.
Yeah, I think she had to enter the information to actually answer the judge's questions about the plea, but they did most of the talking as normal. Um, the victim's family was Eric's family was just wonderful people. His sisters, his parents were just delightful folks, and this had broken their heart. Particularly because not only was their son killed, but he was killed by someone that they cared for and loved and trusted, and so it was a really difficult time for them. And she still seemed to me to be enjoy being the center of the attention.
Yeah, and obviously she got a plea deal, so she will get out. Right now, she's scheduled to be released in 2029. So I guess, do you feel like that's a danger to the public? I mean, how do you feel about that?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't think there's a general danger to it, but her personality was such that it very duplicitous and um self-focused, and you don't know what will happen. And I don't think that it's likely that she would commit another crime, but it's really hard to predict those things. But we felt like time passage, people grow older. Usually they um, calm down in their ideas and their behavior, and so we thought that would protect the community and it protected the family. And right or wrong, that's what we agreed to do, and we thought it was the right thing at the time.
It's kind of interesting. I mean, I would think you only had a handful full of female murderers over the years, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, most of violent crimes are committed by males, I mean, and young males, and it's unusual for it to be a female that commits any violent crime, and especially a homicide. If it is, they're domestic related.
And we have had several in North Carolina that are really high profile. Blanche Taylor Moore, Velma Barfield. Did you look back at any of those cases just to have an understanding of why arsenic, why a woman would use arsenic?
Well, I read a fair amount about it, and you try to understand the behavior, and it's really hard for most of us to think about someone that you're married to or that you profess to be in love with, that you do things with, that you sleep with every night, and every day you're putting some toxin in their food or drink to kill them. I mean, that just, to most of us, that sort of thing is foreign and hard for us to understand. We understand people getting angry and in a fit of rage doing a violent act, but we just don't understand that kind of careful
Methodical.
planning and methodical way about it.
And really torturing someone
It
because, I mean,
is.
there's a lot of evidence that he was sick off and on for many, many months.
Yeah, yeah, it was. It really was, and it's hard for us to fathom that generally, and we especially don't do it when we identify with the people. These were folks that were, held respectable jobs. They were educated, or she was educated, and that sort of thing. So we just don't expect to see that kind of behavior. It's hard for us to understand
Especially when somebody is the father of your
your child.
child.
Yeah,
That's really hard to understand.
it
And I
really
mean,
is.
not to invoke Chris again, but he used to say, just get a divorce. Why, why,
Exactly.
why
Yeah,
do people kill their spouses? Is it money? Is it child custody? I mean, all of that stuff can be worked out.
it was. Chris did a great job, and he and this team of investigators really did. I think he's right. I mean, we think you can't live with somebody, you just part ways. But in this, somehow or another, in her mind, um, she couldn't do that, and she elected to kill Eric instead of just walking away.
Yeah, and that's unfortunately how a lot of these cases seem to end.
But he,
What stands out to you about this case?
well, one, it probably was the most challenging legal case that I dealt with, just because of the difficult issues and the length that we had to go to get the evidence, the length of time it took. Uh, but I think it sort of reinforces to me the law enforcement that we had in Wake County and the commitment of people here to solve this case and to bring it to a conclusion. I think speaks well of our system, that people can be proud of the fact that when we have these terrible things, that there are people that work on them, like Chris and his team, day and night until they're resolved.
And maybe 25 years ago, there was more resources to do that, maybe more time, more inclination. The world is moving so quickly now, it's hard to imagine all that attention
Yeah. It's
that
a
you were
difficult.
able to pay.
It is. It's a different time. It just different things happen at different times, and we were lucky that we had the team of folks that we had there. We were lucky that we had good lawyers that we all worked the case from both sides, and it was really um, good. Nowadays they might solve it quicker. Now we may have better tools than
Well,
we had
because
back
of
then.
technology, yeah. I
Yeah,
think the technology that we have today to be able to look at text messages and emails and phone calls and GPS and all of that can really help solve cases. Well, thank you so much for your
sure.
time today and
Glad to,
for
glad to help.
recalling details of 25 years ago, which I know is not always an easy
Yeah,
thing to do.
it's hard.
Um, yeah, but it was. I think it's an interesting case, and I think it's one that people have talked about for years and will continue to talk about for a long time to come.
Sure. Thanks. I enjoyed it.